Hey everybody, welcome to episode 7 of Adventure CMO. We're really excited to have on the show this week Gleb Brichko, CMO at Harness and longtime collaborator. We're really excited to get into his mindset as a CMO and his point of view on brands, being focused on operating at scale and really growing alongside the brands that he's leading. So welcome, Gleb.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Good to see you.
Yeah, how are you? Where are you calling in from today?
Calling in from my home, fresh off a week on the road, in my home office today, but heading into our HQ once we're up here.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like when we talked last week, you were in Jersey.
Yeah. Last week was Jersey, but this week back in a beautiful sunny Bay Area.
Awesome. Well, I'd love to maybe start. You could give the people listening a little bit of your background. Maybe start with some of your origin story, which I think is super inspiring and I'm really interesting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So going back many years to the last century, born and raised in Ukraine, moved here with my folks to the Bay Area. Very fortunate to have ended up here, sort of like at the rise of the Silicon Valley wave. So I grew up around here, went to school around here. Actually, landed in marketing by complete accident. In high school, I thought I'm going to be a video game designer. So I got a summer internship working at a company that did 3D model prototyping, which I thought was like close enough to gaming. Spend the summer, installing Windows NT on people's machines and watching the bar grow. And then they were rebranding the company and they threw a project my way and they were like, hey, why don't you build us a website? And so picked up an HTML book and kind of went at it. And since then, really held a variety of, demand jobs, creative jobs, brand jobs. But then really honed in on the demand side of the house, probably like 5-6 years into my career, and haven't left it since. But yeah,
For sure.
over the years, been very fortunate to experience some earlier stage high growth startups, and then was very fortunate to work for some brands like Fortinet, like Nutanix, like Rubrik, and now at another rocket ship called Harness.
Love it. Awesome. Yeah, I know when we first started collaborating, you were at Nutanix and demand role, but certainly doing a lot more than that. Talk a little bit about the journey as a brand and marketing leader in those high growth startups. Like what does that feel like? I know a lot of our listeners might be at a public company or might be agency side. What's the high growth startup vibe? What does that feel like as a marketing leader?
Yeah, I mean, I want to tell everyone about like our journey. We've
Hmm.
known each other. I don't even know how many, like 10, 11 years now we've been working together.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
I always, when folks ask me for referrals for a great agency, I always obviously hold you guys in high regard. I still remember the days when you guys were like a 3 or 4 person shop, and we had this. It was the website project, right? Like the website overhaul for Nutanix,
Hmm.
and I just remember like the all hands on deck vibe that we had inside the company, and you guys like absolutely matched that vibe that we needed at the time, and it was just kind of like no holds barred, has to get done, and we got it done. And
Yeah.
since we've done all kinds of crazy projects with you guys, both on the website and all that, but I'll never forget it. I'll never forget how closely we partnered with you all, and like it almost felt, not even almost, it felt like you guys were like in house with us, and
Hmm.
you're Bill Miller and a couple of other folks who were just like killing ourselves at the time, uh trying to get all this stuff stood up, and you guys were totally in the boat with us. And I always look back at those times fondly. But as far as early startup vibe, it's like, the way to describe it is you're surrounded by vacuum. right? You're always trying to punch above your weight. There's vacuum everywhere. There's never enough people. There's never enough dollars. And it's all about, being strategic, but at the same time, a quote that I use from a colleague of mine is like, you have to get dirt under your fingernails, right? Like you can't be top, you have to be in the business. And so when I look back at some of those journeys, it's like, there's no job that's beneath you. Everyone's an IC, regardless of what title you hold. And for me personally, that's probably the most rewarding and the most like exciting part of the journey. I'd say the difference is, some companies you're kind of just like building absolutely from the ground up, and that's interesting and exciting, and you can really sort of leave your mark on things. But once you start getting into companies that are a little bit further along the journey, you really have to start thinking about not just how you build, but how you build for scale. And if push comes to shove next year, if you did everything right this year, next year you have to 10x what you did this year. And so, building that foundation is just critical, even when you're early along the journey.
For sure. I love that you said that. It's been fun being able to be on that journey with you and having experienced those some of those moments in multiple different instances over the years. But one of the things that I've always found, there's two Glebisms that I have to share, because there are two things that like have lived with our team far beyond like, collaborating and all that. One is, I remember, for any account managers listening out there, there's something that Gleb said once that literally changed how we think about client services, which was, and you'll probably not remember it, Gleb, but one time back in the day, I remember I was trying to get a hold of you, and I couldn't get a hold of you. And I was like, well, I emailed you, and I texted you once, and you're like, if you haven't emailed me or texted me 20 times and I haven't said, Nate, stop trying to get a hold of me, you have not tried hard enough to get a hold of me. It was really funny because it wasn't said in anything but intentionality, and I loved it because it was a great reminder that sometimes when you're on the agency side of things, with the best of intentions, you can be a little bit passive, and it's actually because you're not wanting to annoy someone. But what I loved about that is you gave us permission to be all in with you and to do what is necessary to keep things moving. And we always took that to heart. And I literally still tell account folks on our team that on like a regular basis when they're like, hey, I emailed them once. And I'm like, nope, not enough. Like, tell me when you've called them 50 times.
People are always afraid to, I noticed that people are like afraid to like cross the line. But I've actually, gotten a lot better on that over the years, and actually hold my team to like a higher standard on that when somebody's trying to get a hold of you, even if you like don't have an answer at the moment, tell them to acknowledge it and tell them that you'll come back with an answer. So I've gotten better at that, Nate. Sorry.
No, but no, I truly, like, it was truly a positive. But the other one that I love, I always will take with us is that you mentioned, in the startup environment, it being a place where you're having to leverage every dollar and make decisions really intentionally. But I've always been inspired by your deliberate, like you will get clarity of what your vision is for a specific need or how you plan to solve it from a marketing standpoint, whether that's a campaign, a site, some sort of demand gen experience, etc. But then what I've always respected about how you make decisions is that once you've made a decision, you're deliberate about like execution and following through on that, and then getting as much learning as possible, which it probably comes from your demand roots. But I'd love to, like, that's something I've always been inspired by, is your capacity to go, we're going to do this, and then let's follow it through and see what happens on the other side, which I do think oftentimes in marketing, especially now with how much data and information we have access to, it can almost create some analysis paralysis. How do you stay locked in on being deliberate and decisive with your decision making?
Yeah, I mean, analysis paralysis is a good way to describe. Like I've hit that. My teams have hit that a few times, but at some point, you have some deadlines, unmovable deadlines, and you just can't afford to like sit and argue anymore, and you just have to go and get it done and sort of like see what happens. So there's always an element of risk. I'll add one more thing to your, working with agencies. Obviously agencies and agency partners have a lot of responsibility, right? Like just being professional partners and, being an integral part of things that you get engaged on. I think responsibility also sits squarely on the client to give enough guidance and not kind of like send the agency partners on the wild goose chase, because time is money and effort, and at some point you end up sort of burning out, and so you kind of have to drive yourself to an internal deadline by when you have to make that call. And if you see the deadline slipping, it just means you have to invest more time and effort to get to the right decision, or what you think at the time is the right decision. So, but in terms of prioritization and driving to an outcome, like I was talking to Greg about this. I've talked to Greg about this a bunch of times. Like I feel like I spent the first half of my career doing and learning arts and crafts marketing. The kind of marketing where like marketing leaders just get replaced and you're just out there doing like this ephemeral stuff that ultimately like is very hard to quantify, very hard to tie to company success, your go-to-market team success. And I had an experience at another company where, marketing was not sort of held in high regard. And part of the reason for that is because it couldn't be quantified. It's like, hey, you could spend this much money or this much money. It's hard to like quantify the outcome on the business. And it really forced me to go and figure out, like, this is like before or in the early stages of like marketing automation. It was very, very long before like there were like attribution models, and first all of this stuff was like in its infancy, but it kind of forced my hand to go and tie, and at the time it was very painful, very manually. I like got 2 interns to just like sit there and like crush Excel, 2 analyst interns, finance interns to crush Excel like the entire summer. That's all that they did for like 2.5 months. But on the other end of that, it was like, hey, here's the dollars that we invested. Here's the campaigns that we drove. Here's the activities that we executed. And we were actually able to like, back then manually link them to meetings and opportunities and ultimately close one business. And it was hard and it was ambiguous, but at the end of the day, it was very rewarding. And so, being able to quantify the inputs and outputs became very clear to me. And then secondly, none of this stuff works if sales and marketing are not in lockstep, right? If marketing's out there doing, God knows what, and salespeople are not really like benefiting from that. And, I've seen times and times again, marketing leaders going in and trying to represent their team's impact on like website sessions and social impressions and, those kinds of things that like don't ultimately like help your sales organization. Yeah. Innately as marketers, we know that there's an impact in there somewhere, but it's very hard to tie to the company targets. And so over the years, myself and folks of my team and a lot of peers, like I think there was a major shift in the last like 15 years or so that, marketing is like a responsible go-to-marketing function and should be driven by performance metrics. And, as a marketing leader, your responsibility is to, align with sales on what those metrics are, align with the rest of the company on what those metrics are, and then, kind of like build your activity mix and your execution around that. And that just makes the decision process a lot easier, because then, like, what are the vitamins, and what are the painkillers of what your team has to go do. And I feel like there's still a huge window and an opportunity for creativity and finding, really interesting solutions to problems, and still coming up with like things that look different, that inspire, that engage. But at the end of the day, like, how do you connect that to what the business needs to grow?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, at the end of the day, you have multiple stakeholders as a marketing leader, and you have to find a way to serve them all. But the ultimate stakeholder is the business. and making sure that you're driving growth. I'll share my favorite all-in moment from our collaboration. Um, from our first memorable shoot, and for one reason or another, we ended up with a kiddie pool full of Gatorade, and Gleb jumped right in, all in, holding the Gatorade, getting wet. It was amazing. And we use often the David Ogilvy quote, everybody washes windows at Grizzly, and I think it's just emblematic of, like, maybe flip it around, like, as an agency, you love to see your clients just get in the weeds with you and contribute ideas. I think it's often under it's just not talked about enough. Like, there's this kind of White Castle mentality where, like, I'm paying you, you're on my clock, come up with ideas. But the best clients are, like, all in, contributing ideas, contributing strategy. And I think you're a great example of that from all of our collaboration. I think one of the things that we talked about, like, just the constant churn at quick growth, high growth companies. One of the things that I noticed is you've had the opportunity to learn from some amazing leaders at each step of the journey that at least we've had view into. Talk a little bit about some of the things that you've taken away from Howard, Ben, some of these other amazing leaders that you've had an opportunity to learn from. I remember there's one meeting at Rubric call we were on, where we heard from one of your leaders, give me something that scares me, and I want to be able to turn it down. I probably won't, but I want you to show me something that I have the opportunity to turn down. And so I think that kind of leadership shows up in a variety of ways. And just maybe tell us a little bit about what you've learned from some of the leaders you've worked with.
Yeah, no, you're right. Like I said, I've been very fortunate to, under some of the best leaders that I've had, just thinking like Julie and Ben, Dan Rogers, some of those folks, like, at a great degree of autonomy to go and figure it out. Having said that, Ben had, especially when it came to brand, Ben, for example, had like very strong points of view. And so we had a lot of walks and discussions and, whiteboards in terms of like what needs to happen. But I think that giving your team the ability to go and come up with, I know you guys probably didn't love my approach, but it's like I always wanted to like start with the funnel, like start with like 10 ideas and then iterate on those ideas. And sometimes 10 goes to like 15, and sometimes it goes to 7, and then it goes to 3. And then you iterate on the 3 and you land on the 1. The thing that pops in my mind is the last collaboration that we did at Nutanix all together now, like super proud of that. And we've done a few, we had done a few in between, but the leader's sort of role in the process is to like send the team off on kind of a fact-finding mission, and a creative exploration mission, and then riff on it like endlessly, right? Well, not endlessly, right? There is a deadline, but ultimately, I just always remember, working with you guys and some other agency partners or even internal, it's like there's that riffing process and kind of like throwing spaghetti at the wall process, and everybody knows what we need to say. But once you land on that one thing, like everybody, like the light goes off and everybody's eyes light up and you're like, this is it. This is the one. Right. And then you just go and polish it and like just make it great and beautiful. And so, that was probably like the biggest takeaway for me, is that I was most creative and successful and driven when I had the agency to go and do the things, like to deliver the outcome at the end of the day, and obviously like partner closely internally, externally, but at the end of the day, I had the autonomy to go and do the things that we all needed to do, because like I understood the task. And so, you know, that was probably like one of my biggest leadership learning moments. You know, like you don't, as a leader, you shouldn't and you can't always be the person to be the one to like mandate and prescribe and come up with the idea, you know, because that's why that's why you hire great people, you know, to let them go and do their best work, right? And I've also been in situations, you know, that are not as great, where, you know, leaders have been sometimes over prescriptive and kind of had their own vision, and it's like my vision or
Right.
or the highway, and that's like, that's not the way to lead. You know, that doesn't foster like the greatest environment, and inevitably you don't end up with a great product. And so I really maybe once or twice remember, you know, sort of having to prescribe, and then in retrospect I was like, you know what, like it was okay, you know, but is this like the best work that we could have done as a team? Probably not. And so both of those times were like great learning experiences for me. And so even to this day, we still get together as a team and have brainstorms on, you know, like little micro campaigns that we do, like around, you know, like some asset launch or an analyst launch report. So it's not truly a campaign, but like spending an hour with the team just riffing ideas, and everybody's laughing, and you know, you just like throw the wildest stuff out there and people are just cracking up. And like those are probably like some of the like best and my most favorite moments in collaborating with the team, you know, because a lot of the other stuff is like data performance and spreadsheets. And so for that like little bit of time, you get to be a marketer. And
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing is like, from our collaboration early on, you and the people giving you that autonomy all believe that like being boring was bad for business, and that's something that's kind of been persistent for us. I think especially in tech and enterprise B2B, like it's uncommon. And you know, the proof is in the results. I think one you know, one thing that I know from all of our collaboration is those relationships and collaboration have really mattered over time, like the web of relationships, both for you and in your journey and for us in our journey. Talk about the importance of collaboration and partnership, especially internally for you as a marketing leader, like how you build that like really tight collaboration with sales, with some of the other orgs inside of the company in order to win.
Yeah. Look, it's something that I've you know, that's another leadership lesson that I learned, you know, from some of the stronger leaders I worked for. You know, like Ben and Julie in particular were very strong at, you know, leading into that and teaching me to do that and prioritizing that. It's not supernatural for a lot of people, you know, to invest time there. Like a lot of people kind of go into their bubble and then struggle to like break through the bubble, because like there's nothing worse that can happen than like, you know, creating something in a bubble and then trying to like sell it to other people. So, you know, and other people like without having consulted them or like gotten their opinion. So like one of the things, you know, I've just like learned how to do, and now it's like almost instinctual, right, is that any big idea that's going to like represent the company externally, you know, whether from a brand perspective or go to market perspective, you need to socialize the heck out of it. And you guys remember how many times I've come to you and said, hey, I need a storyboard for this like crazy idea I have, so I can go and show it to every regional sales leader, because, you know, what may work in North America might not or probably will not work in Japan. Right. So it's actually really important I go and spend, you know, time with like the Japanese marketer and the Japanese sales leader to make sure that it lands in the region. And if it doesn't, you know, do we need to go and we can figure out like, how can we make these things work? Right. Because without getting that buy-in early on, from a product organization, from the leadership, from the sales organization, whatever you're working on, like that thing's going to be dead on arrival, right? Because without cross-functional and like cross-company support and adoption, your campaign will end like 2 weeks after you put it into market. And by the way, coming back to the project that we did at 𝗁𝗵𝗶𝘀 all together now, that thing had a shelf life of I think like 18 to 24 months. And usually we would go and refresh, every 12 months or so, like around our sales kickoff time frame. So we were kind of like on a schedule, and this thing permeated, field demand activities and direct mails, and like we really got a lot of legs out of it. And all of that was due to the fact that like everybody was bought in before like a single asset got produced, right? Before we went and did everything. And so yeah, that's like a huge priority for me. There were a couple of other campaigns, like smaller in-house campaigns that we did that were actually great campaigns, but they were shelved because we just couldn't get the buy-in, or it wasn't the right time and all that. But then like the time came, and when the time came, we made the most out of the opportunity, because by then everybody kind of arrived that, hey, it's time for us to go and go pick a fight with a competitor or make a statement in the market that hasn't been made before. And so sometimes it's just a timing issue, but again, it's one of those things where when you have competitor organizations talk about something that you launched that bothered them so deeply, they talk about it 3 years later.
Right.
And you have like the full weight of the organizational support behind it, and people were bought in. It adds like so much more weight and so much more reach and excitement and internal support to where the thing just has legs, and that's I'm glad you hit on that, because that's critical for any marketer to really embrace and believe in and operate that way.
Yeah. Very well said. I think that's, if there was one learning and takeaway that we can take away from being on the agency side for well over a decade with various CMOs and a lot of different enterprise organizations and high growth organizations, it's that the more consensus that's built internally ahead of any campaign or brand transformation, and the more executive buy-in that can exist before any of that stuff gets launched, it's 100% of the time it will be better received across the board, internally and externally, from a marketplace standpoint, from an internal culture perspective, because it just goes so far when people are bought in on a unified vision. And I think that's something that I wish I could say happens more often, but it's crazy that is often the biggest detractor or anchor to successful campaigns, successful brand transformations, etc., is that doesn't happen. And there's like a hopeful wish that maybe it'll happen down the road, and it just generally the snowball doesn't work that way, and it doesn't lead to the outcomes that people are looking for.
Yeah, and when you lag the snowball effect after the campaign has launched, like another thing I realized, like, it's just not great for team morale.
Yeah,
because people spend all this time and effort, and now they walk out and they're like, hey, we don't have an opportunity to like be creative and do exciting things here, and we're just gonna keep doing the pictures of servers in the data center for the next 3 years, and like it burns a lot of people out. And so, like, to your point, it's very much a leader's responsibility to make sure the consensus is there, and that you've created like that safe creative space for people to go and do their best work, something that they can look back at in their career and be super proud.
For sure. Well, tell us about today, like where you're at today. Would love to know a little bit more about Harness. Share a little bit about the marketing org you're building there, and how you're building the culture, why it's an exciting company and product, and get people hyped.
Yeah, absolutely. So Harness is solving, I would say, one of the most like existential problems that exists out there today. There are about, give and take, 30 million software developers in the world, and believe it or not, like, there's a shortage of software developers out there. Because if you think at, just sort of like any kind of innovation that happens in the world today, 99% of the time it's powered by software, right? And so you need more developers. Like, there is more code that's being pushed than ever before today, or being produced than ever before today. And now, with all these AI tools and all the coding agents and all that, like, there's actually even more code that's being pushed out. The challenge is, how do you deliver that code from a developer's laptop or a developer environment into actual production? And so that's kind of like why Harness exists. Roughly like 15 years ago, there was an introduction of this thing called DevOps, right? With the explosion of cloud and microservices. Teams were really looking to move away from that like monolithic way of launching applications, once or twice a year. The goal is like, you create some code, you test it, you secure it, you get it into production. And so that's why Harness exists. The company got started in 2017 by a guy named 𝘁𝗵𝗶𝘀𝗶, who was previously the founder of a company, AppDynamics, that was sold to Cisco on like the eve of its IPO, which is a really, interesting and legendary, Silicon Valley story. And so 𝘁𝗫 is an engineer at heart. Fun fact, I actually used to work with 𝘁𝗫 like decades ago at this little startup, and he was a staff software engineer. I was like a marketing specialist, and followed his success over the years. And so when the opportunity came to join his company, I jumped on it. Great guy, absolute just like star and innovator, and really, really a great name in the space. So in 2017, he started a company to do just that. There was this sprawl, in this concept of DevOps, right? Like, how do you get code into production faster and better for multiple development teams working on different parts of applications? How do you streamline that process? Because the whole concept of DevOps ended up being just a total like scattershot, yard sale collection of different tools and open source projects, and all of it was like held together by scripts and duct tape, and it was just messy. And the biggest challenge with that approach is that all these like millions of developers out there are spending like 40-50% of their time just doing like grunt work. Like, inside Harness, we call it toil. And it's all about like keeping these scripts together and trying to secure things and all that. So like, they're not in that like flow state where they're building applications, writing great code, improving on their features. It's like 50% of your time is spent, washing the dishes instead of preparing a beautiful meal, right? And so it's a big problem. The reality is the problem has not been solved. And so Harness has a very different approach to it. The company has the best in class, what's called continuous delivery product, which is essentially the pipeline of getting your software from, the developer's laptop into production. And over the years, the company added what inside the company we call modules, which are essentially like all the different components that previously used to be standalone tools that are now integrated into this delivery pipeline. And so it's for everything from, testing the code, QAing the code, securing the code, making sure that your application can withstand, network disruptions and server downtimes, testing features before you deploy them at scale and market. You guys probably remember, there was recently a security vendor who like brought half of the world down. Was something that easily could have been avoided if you use a solution like Harness, because if you're able to like get through all these checks and balances, right, that make sure that your application is not going to fail, and you do a measured rollout, right? You 100% can avoid these kind of incidents. Like bugs are inevitable. Like there's always going to be bugs, but it's all about like how do you deploy the code in the most secure and efficient manner. And so that's what the company is about, at a high level. It's the pace of innovation here is, second to none. Like I've never seen anything like it. Like every year we're adding products, or there's been a couple of like really successful mergers and acquisitions. And so now we're kind of like filling that vacuum, going back to our earlier conversation, we're filling the vacuum in the DevOps and engineering space to help organizations go from pushing code, once every 2 months to like multiple times a day. They're pushing out edits and changes to their code and doing it safely and securely, which, in today's world is a requirement for, any online business. Yeah,
For sure. Well, I hope said security company is using Harness now. Tell us about like the team that you're building. Do you have kind of like mantras inside of the Harness marketing org as first time CMO in the last 6 months or so? What are your priorities? What are you focusing on? How are you building the culture inside your team?
Yeah, absolutely. Very fortunate to work alongside, hands down the most collaborative sales team that I have worked in. And I've worked with some great sales teams throughout my career. And before I joined the company, Carlos De La Torre, who's our CRO, and I had a chat before I joined, and it became super clear to me that it's going to be a very sort of like, again, relationship built on trust and collaboration, and that marketing is going to be truly seen and recognized as a partner to sales, as long as we go and like, plan these things out and do things, hand in hand and do it together. And so that was actually like a big reason for why I joined, is because I could sense from the start that there's going to be a very strong PG culture, right? Pipeline generation culture inside the company. And that in order for the sales reps and the SDRs here to be successful, you need the full sort of like ecosystem. You need the marketing, you need the partners, you need the SDRs to all contribute in order to make the sales team successful. And so I would say that's kind of like the cultural landmark of everyone who I brought on, is that everything that we're doing here is in service of the business and in service of the go-to-market organization. So there are other things that, you can't like 100% tie to the funnel, things that we do around like developer relations and brand awareness and those kind of things. But at the same time, it helps you create enough aura in the market, to start creating inbound and brand recognition. And it's something that we, I feel like materially moved the needle on in the last year and a half that I've been here. And then the second part is, it actually came out of the offsite, the first like full team offsite that I had with the team about 6 months ago, is that there are no shortcuts. There are no shortcuts to success, that, and those are the kind of people that I always tend to hire, that I'm attracted to, is that people who have, skill and expertise in their field, and people who have, who are SMEs in their space and are just like generally like all-star athletes at their jobs. But, there are no shortcuts to success, and, like the intellectual curiosity that everybody needs to have, and always going like a level or two deeper, like the inside joke here is, right click, new tab. Just when you think you've gotten to the answer, like right click, new tab, and do it again and go a level deeper. That again, like at this stage in the company is just such a special time when the company is growing at the pace as it is. And, like nothing's perfect. And there's always, going to be things that you have to kind of like make calls on and figure out. And sometimes things don't go your way. That everyone here is, again, resilient and is willing to chase like every ground ball that comes at them, right? And yeah, that's kind of like, those are kind of like the basics of the culture that we've created here. And yeah, I'm incredibly proud of the team and everything that they've accomplished so far, but more importantly are geared up to do in the next 12 months.
That's awesome. Well, I feel like we heard a little baseball metaphor in there. Maybe we'll end kind of outside the work sphere. And I know you're a baseball dad. You got amazing kids, and would love to hear maybe just, I know, look, we all know the CMO is a crazy stressful job. What are some of your pieces of advice for CMOs who may or may not be parents, but just in general, like keeping that drive, making sure that you have enough outputs outside of work, as well as just being able to stay curious? Like, how do you keep the engine going?
I mean, for me, very fortunate to be a dad to 3 great kiddos. Very fortunate to have a very supportive spouse who supports all my crazy endeavors and commitment. Yeah, I think it just comes down to like balance and prioritization. I remember someone told me years ago, there's like a few buckets in your life. Like there's a work bucket, there's a family bucket, there's a hobby bucket, and then there's a sleep bucket, right? And that's it. Like those are the 4 buckets that you really have. Or I guess you could say friends and family. But it's for me, like the work buckets and the family buckets are like the 2 sort of like non-negotiable buckets. That's where I'm always going to invest the most time and effort. And it's really just like, how do you properly balance the 2? It's a give and take. It's choppy. It's not quite as consistent that you want to be. But for me personally, right now, the like hobby and free time bucket, that's the one that I'm kind of like negotiating on, right? And being more flexible on, because for me personally right now, like with the stuff that the kids are doing, and they don't get younger, and the time with them is limited. I heard this like crazy stat that like just shook me the other day. You spend 80% of your time with your kids before the age of 12, right? Because then they kind of taper off and they go off and they start doing their own thing, and you want them to, and so right now I'm in that like golden age where they actually like still want to hang out with me and do things together and get to like, watch them play sports and be a big part of their lives. And then my work is, again, you guys know, like I have feel a great sense of responsibility to the business. I feel like a great sense of responsibility to my team. The people that I bring on here, I'm very invested in their personal success and professional success. And so, yeah, there's just stuff that, you're going to have to leave on the table in favor of the things that you want to, prioritize for yourself. And that's kind of like how I ladder up my decisions. So, but yeah, it's balance, just balance and prioritization, and not letting any of the buckets get too empty.
Love it.
I love that.
Well, this has been great. Really appreciate you going on the journey with us, and sharing some wisdom with the folks listening. And just so much to draw from on your journey, and excited to hear the response. So cheers.
Yeah, cheers for having you guys.
Appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah, I love the collaboration over the years. You guys are absolutely world class, and I'm incredibly inspired by the team you all built and some of the projects that we worked on over the years, and the stuff that you guys are putting out right now. It's top notch. Great job.
Cheers.
Thanks,
Appreciate it. Well,
great to see you, man.
Yeah, great to see you guys.
Yeah, great to see you. If you're listening and enjoyed the show, definitely make sure to follow, subscribe, and share, and follow Gleb on his journey of harness.